Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, my guest is LaRae Quy, who's a former special agent with the FBI. And together with LaRae today, we'll talk about something different than usual. We're not talking about terrorism. We're not talking about true crime. Today, we'll talk about mental toughness. Thanks for your time, LaRae. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely, Leo. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, before we start, can you give us some background, some context about this research is of yours about mental toughness started because, as I said, you were a special agent with the FBI dealing mostly with terrorism. Therefore, it's kind of a change of pace, change of context to turn from the FBI to mental toughness. How did this whole thing start?
Actually, mental toughness for me started as a kid because I grew up on a remote cattle ranch in the middle of Wyoming. And, for us, fast food was hitting a deer about 60 miles an hour, but it was remote. It was a lot of hard work and no place for wimps, or people who didn't know how to get the job done. So I was instilled with the grit and the perseverance that's needed to get a job done at a very early age. And then throw me into the FBI Academy, and more determination, more perseverance was needed. And so basically, after I retired from the FBI, I finally had time to think about all those lessons that I had learned over the course of life. And that is what started me on this journey of mental toughness and a strong mind.
Well, let's start with the question that everyone is wondering right now. Is mental toughness more about not being knocked to the floor or more about bouncing back?
What you're really talking about is resilience, which is definitely a component of mental toughness. So I'm going to take a moment to define mental toughness, because too many articles and books rely on sort of like battle-ready techniques that promise to show people how to take control of their destiny. But those battle-ready techniques, they'll just tell you to hunker down and bulldoze your way through obstacles. And that might work in football or snowdrifts, but not in real life, because we can't always bluster our way through life. In reality, what you really need is an open, flexible, and adaptive mind. And you also need to be savvy enough to recognize not only your own emotions, but those of others. So mental toughness is the right approach, but I think it's important to define it. It's managing your thoughts, your words, and your behavior in ways that will set you up for success. And so one thing I learned in the FBI is that while theories are nice, evidence is always better. So I've actually developed a mental toughness assessment that has been validated by the clinical psychology department at Arizona State University. It's free, and it will give your audience an evidence-based assessment of their mental toughness. And all your audience needs to do is go to my website at LaRaeQuy.com and take the assessment. And I'd say something else about resilience. The U.S. Army brought together psychologists to help them develop resilience in troops that were being brought back from war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and to help them cope with PTSD. And they found that resilience has primarily 4 components. First of all, people must really believe in what they're doing. It's not just a job, it's something they believe in. Number 2 is that they need to stay positive and not let negativity take hold in their mind. Number 3, people need a support group, whether it's family or a group of friends or colleagues. And the 4th thing surprises a lot of people, but it's developing spiritual practices. Now, that may or may not mean religion, may or may not mean a church or a mosque or a synagogue, but it is an understanding that we're not our own God and that there is something bigger and better and bolder than us out there. And one of the first things I did when I retired from the FBI was I went to San Francisco Theological Seminary, and it was a graduate program. I was there for 3 years. And people would ask me, they would say, how did you go from the FBI to seminary? And I'd say, well, actually, it's a very easy transition, because in the FBI, what I did was I just kept uncovering the facts until I got to the bottom of what was really going on. And that's what spirituality is really about. You just pull back the layers one by one until you get to the nugget of who you are.
Well, very well said. I would like you to elaborate on one of the topics that you touched, that is negative thinking. And I think that mental toughness is also about controlling one's emotions, one of which is negative thinking. How does a person control his negative thinking when facing a problem in life?
Well, that's a great question. And, absolutely, mental toughness is about controlling emotions. But the first thing to remember is that our first response will always be emotional. Whether it's positive or negative depends on the situation. But our brain is hardwired to pay more attention to pay more attention to negative information than positive information. And the reason is simple. Our brain's first job is to keep us safe. And negative things can be a threat to our safety. Positive ones are nice, but they don't threaten our well-being. And psychologists have found that you can't be, I find this very interesting. Psychologists have found that you can't be negative and grateful at the same time. They're conflicting emotions. So people with high levels of gratitude actually have low levels of resentment or anger or envy or whatever, all those negative emotions. So when we focus on what we're grateful for, we choose positive emotions over negative ones. And since, gratitude is a positive emotion, it produces feelings like happiness and contentment and all those feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. So by consciously practicing gratitude daily, we can really help these neural pathways strengthen themselves and create a grateful and positive attitude on ourselves.
Well, we also have the other side of the coin, of course, that is positive thinking. That is a very powerful weapon. And we have lots of philosophers who talked about it. The first examples that come to my mind would be Ralph Waldo Emerson, but also Norman Vincent Peale, who's very famous for writing a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. And being an Italian, of course, I also have to mention Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius. What is the role of positive thinking in mental toughness?
Well, positive thinking, like resilience, is a cornerstone of mental toughness. Now, in the FBI, we used to call it hunt the good stuff. And the reason is that we often need to hunt the positive in our situation. I mean, if you're confronted with a roadblock or an obstacle, it's tough to find the good things in it. But psychologists from Stanford University have found that we need 5 positive thoughts to counter each one negative thought. And I'll give you an example of how I use this sort of subconsciously, but I intuitively knew it would help me get to where I needed to be. But one of the training program or exercises in the FBI Academy was diving from a 20-foot diving board into a pool of water with an M16 and then swim to the other side. I was scared to death because I grew up on that cattle ranch. We never had swimming pools. I mean, I didn't know how to swim. In fact, I was actually afraid of water. So I stood up there and I was the very last to go because I kept pulling back and pulling back. And my classmates and my instructor were just waiting for me to do this. And I was scared to death. I just knew I'd drown. I mean, what am I going to do? Sink to the bottom and stay there. But the thoughts that were going through my mind were this: I had never heard of anybody drowning in this exercise. And that would be the kind of thing that would get some publicity. The FBI wouldn't want the lawsuit my parents would bring against them if I did drown. My instructor was a good swimmer and he could save me. I had a life jacket, which is number 4. And finally, number 5 was that I sensed that a career in the FBI was my path forward. It was where my journey was going to take me. So I did take the jump. I didn't drown. It was not pretty. I sort of crawled on the bottom to the other side of the pool, but I made it and I qualified.
Well, another emotion we have coming in is fear. And you mentioned it, but of course, I think that every one of us mentions it, faces it on a daily basis. How does a person control fears? For instance, when facing a roadblock such as, let's make an example, a university exam.
Yeah. Fear pops up at the most inconvenient times, doesn't it? I'll never forget the first day I shot a gun. I was on the firing line at the FBI Academy holding my Smith & Wesson .38 revolver, and my heart just raced as I wiped the sweat from my palms. I was filled with uncertainty and fear, worried that I wouldn't shoot well enough to qualify. But what had happened is I let my emotional limbic brain, and that's that. If you put your hand into a fist, the limbic brain is sort of the thumb. It's the small part of your brain, and this would be the thinking brain, the thinking part of our brain. And what happens, even though it's small, it's mighty. That little limbic brain generates our. Let me just say that is. It can take control of the slower thinking cerebral brain, which is the bigger part of our brain. So the limbic brain generates anxiety and fear. Now, in the caveman days, this kept us safe from saber-toothed tigers. But in modern life, it hinders our ability to overcome fear we encounter, whether it's in business or school or life. But since fear makes your thinking brain yield control to your emotional limbic brain, you have to engage your rational brain if you plan to overcome the unpredictability of modern life. And one of the best ways of doing, there's several ways to do that. People always say, oh, stop and take a breath. And so, okay, that helps. A deep breath helps a little bit. But more importantly, is that when you do take a moment, you give that slower cerebral brain time to kick in and counter what that little limbic brain is pushing out as far as fear and anxiety and all those other emotions. So that's one thing. And the other thing is, for your audience, I would just suggest label that fearful thought that comes up in a situation and but it's important to keep the label to 1 or 2 words, because if you enter into a dialogue about what you fear, you only give it legs. So tamp down each fearful thought so you can look at each one in a rational manner with the cerebral brain. And at that point, you can begin to generate those 5 positive thoughts you'll need to overcome the fear and move ahead. And I think when we experience fear, basically we become a victim of our own thinking. You know, we think fast by using stereotypes and rules of thumb and jumping to conclusions and using memory, you know, for something that happened, 10 years ago in the same situation and you weren't happy with your reaction. So thinking fast and stereotypes is actually pretty efficient and pretty accurate most of the time. But sometimes, and this is, I think, what's really important, is that we stereotype ourselves. We have these self-limiting beliefs about ourselves. And I say, update your stereotypes frequently, because the person you're misjudging could be yourself.
Well, isn't there a positive side of fear, like something that stimulates you?
That stimulates. Oh, absolutely. And all emotions are there for a reason. So it doesn't do any good, and it's actually quite stupid and counterintuitive to try to tamp down every negative emotion. And you get that a lot these days, be happy all the time. I mean, happiness books are just flying off the shelves. But each emotion has something to teach us. And when we ignore that, we miss signals all around us. And so, no, we may not be battling saber-toothed tigers these days, but we could be confronting somebody who wishes us harm or wants to undermine us in some way, whether it's in our career or, our personal life or whatever it happens to be. So our brain is trying to keep us safe. That's the thing to remember. And so what's important is that you don't let that emotional small limbic brain take total control. Use that cerebral brain to help bring in rational thoughts.
Well, let me ask you the question that is the most important for me, because I'm the world champion of overthinking. How bad is overthinking when you try to develop mental toughness? Because in my experience, overthinking also always spirals down to negative thinking.
It does. And again, it's when I was talking about labeling what you feel, keep it to 1 or 2 words, acknowledge it. That tells your cerebral brain you're on it, that you haven't just ignored it or you didn't see it. You acknowledge it. And that allows the cerebral brain to calm down a bit. It knows that you're not going to, otherwise it'll wake you up about 3 o'clock in the morning. You know what I mean? It has to know that you're on it. So labeling a situation when you see yourself spiraling down, it will help halt. Again, halt that negative spiral. And it, of course, it's tempting to overthink our situation. And the problem is that when we do that, we think of all sorts of reasons we're going to fail. So again, the key is to remain positive. And, as an FBI agent, I'll just tell you, investigations rarely follow a straightforward path with predictable conclusions. Instead, it's just this trail that it's like a maze until you finally get to the nugget that is the truth. But people who are mentally tough aren't derailed when things don't go as planned because they thought of contingencies. So there's overthinking it, but there's also planning contingencies, a plan B, because not everything is going to turn out. And you don't want to be left flat-footed because you've not thought beyond your initial plan. So, life just doesn't unfold as we plan it. Most of us learn this about 2nd grade, but, it still stings when things don't work out the way we had planned them to work out. So, a lot of us don't know how to move forward if things don't go our way. So apparently, this is when you need contingency. So when that primary plan goes out the door, you can move down to the next plan. So those what if scenarios can be your friend by letting yourself play out those worst case scenarios. And again, your brain then knows you're on it. So the anxiety you'll actually calm down because you've worked out the worst case scenarios.
Well, some people are very good at staying cool when they are under pressure. How does that work?
It takes time and experience. I will say self-awareness is the key to keeping your cool under pressure. Now, I was an undercover agent, and FBI agents who work undercover are given a series of psychological tests to determine their level of self-awareness. Self-awareness, I mean, when I went to undercover school, I thought I'd learn how to scissor kick, in high heels and, do all these exciting things I see in the movies and in TV. So I was a bit surprised when they started off with all these, cognitive tests to really test my self-awareness. But this is the thing. Self-awareness enables agents to predict their responses when confronted with the unknown, which often happens in undercover work. And I will give you an example of working undercover. It was my first undercover role. And I just didn't ask enough questions, right? And this guy he was working against a gang that they extortion, murder, you name it. He was working undercover against them. He just needed an arm charm to go with him to a barbecue. So I show up, I left my gun at home, I had a false ID, I'm ready to go. And I get in there and they're a rough bunch. That's fine. I am very light complected and I needed to go get some sunscreen. And I went to the bedroom where they had taken my handbag and I saw 2 women going through my handbag. And I knew that was not good. And then 3 guys walked into the same room and they closed the door. So it was me and these 5 people. And going back to fear, I felt fear, and I was under a lot of pressure, and the stakes were high because these were serious people, right? They started asking me a bunch of questions about me and where I came from and why I was there and who was that idiot I was with. And I knew right then and there I was in deep trouble because they had already fingered the undercover agent I was with. They knew he was not who he was supposed to be. So I swallowed and I just said, I just was completely honest with them. I told them everything about who I was. I came from a ranch in Wyoming. I thought if I didn't get away when I went to school, I'd never get away. I told them everything about me except my true name and my true employment. And it just so happens that being by that authentic and being that self-aware and comfortable with myself, that one of the women, the initial women in the room, turned to me and said, "I'm from Oklahoma and I understand exactly what you mean."
Mhm.
So her and I created a bond, and that saved me because at some point she's the one who went over and opened the door and let me out. And it turned out that they did suspect the undercover agent I was with of being, I believe, in a rival gang. And they had a hit put out on him. So he was transferred immediately to another city, but no mention was ever made of me. So I kept my cool because I was confident in who I am, and I was self-aware, and that allowed me to be authentic. So those are the kinds of things that will help keep you cool when you're in a tough situation. And I love this quote by Lao Tzu, and it goes something like this: "He who knows others is wise. He who knows himself is enlightened."
Yes, absolutely. I know that quote as well. What is the key of finding the strength to fight back when life knocks you to the ground?
Mm. I've given this a great deal of thought. Like most of your audience, and myself, um, we've been through a few hard knocks. I mean, you can't get through life without it. But the answer to your question is very simple. The way to find the strength to fight back when life is hard is good values. I just have a problem with our current culture's relentless pursuit of happiness. It's all you read in social media and books that tell us that the goal in life is to be happy. Um, and this vacuous and very self-focused culture only asks us to identify what makes us happy and then gives us permission to substitute happiness in life for a purpose that provides meaning to our life. And those things are two very different things. I'm happy when I'm with my little puppy or eating an ice cream cone. I love that. That's happiness. Going to the beach, I'm happy. But bringing meaning to our life, that's something different. And I've come to realize that there's a big difference between, and this is where mentally tough people, I think, really have an edge up, because there's a big difference between passion and purpose. Passion asks what the world can give to me. What will make me happy? My dog, an ice cream cone, whatever. Purpose, however, asks what I can give to the world. And we mix the two up. Passion, if we believe what we read or see in the movies or TV, passion is supposed to lead to happiness. But our pursuit of happiness is toxic because it conflates the good life with living the good life. We all suffer, but if we're mature and smart about it, we suffer for the things that matter to us. And so the issue is that our fixation on happiness has produced a crop of people who just don't know how to function in the real world. Protecting people from obstacles and adversity won't make them happier. It just makes them insecure. They have no compass in a storm because they've been raised to consider any inconvenience basically intolerable. Our values are defined by what we're willing to struggle to achieve. If something holds value for us, we will endure the pain and the struggle to make it happen. And the person we become is defined by how we overcome our struggles and our suffering and our pain. Our greatest moments in life will be defined by these things, not by our pathetic attempt at happiness, because it's in our choices that we become mentally tough. We learn to prioritize our emotions, our thoughts, and our behavior in ways that we can pick what is important to us based on values and beliefs.
Well, how does mental toughness combine with leadership? Because I have a twofold question here. I think that leaders should have mental toughness, but at the same time, they should help their co-workers develop it.
Well, a good leader will help their team members find purpose in what they're doing. Now, you can be a checkout clerk at a grocery store, but you can find purpose in making the people you meet feel better about themselves just by saying a kind word or complimenting them. A good leader exhibits good values, both in themselves and in their company. Now, we all know poor values have led to, financial meltdowns and the overthrow of governments and the throwaway mentality that infuses today's corporations, whether it's their employees or their products. Crappy values in both our personal and professional lives have led to a mental health crisis that just doesn't show any sign of letting up. So good leaders help their team members find ways to move beyond poor ethics and toxic attitudes, because well-being reminds us that each life is an opportunity to experience love, joy, and meaning. So I think it's a privilege to be in a leadership position where you can make a significant impact on how your team members think about their emotions, their thoughts, and their behavior, and what is motivating them.
Well, is it possible to train oneself for mental toughness? The first thing that comes to my mind would be sports. Because, for instance, if you play a team sport, you have to keep your concentration high for a very long time. And at the same time, you just have to don't let your opponent play their best game tonight, because you just have to play a better game than he is doing. Are there other ways? Well, first off, is sports a good way? Are there other ways?
And what you're talking about, too, is that team spirit, and that is crucial. It's essential for success. Mental toughness is an individual sport.
Okay.
And I know that coaches love to throw that word mental toughness out there. And it gets back to that bulldog mentality. Just push your way through. And if you have an opponent, just knock him out of the way. And again, that's great for sports, but that's not necessarily going to get you where you want to be any other place. You're not always going to be on the playing field. And while that can build confidence to some degree, but as far as building mental toughness, it is an individual. It's a solitary journey in that respect. The first place to start, and I've already mentioned it, is building self-awareness. To be mentally tough, you need a deep understanding of what makes you tick. That's first of all. That way you can land on your feet when you're confronted with the unknown. If it's simply blocking a tackle by a football player, that's a tactic, that's a strategy, but it's not necessarily mental toughness. So first one would be build self-awareness. The second one would be push through your limits. To reach your full potential, you must be comfortable in being uncomfortable. So, one of the most irritating things for me working for the FBI was a transfer policy. So as a new agent, I worked on 2 different squads in 6 months. In the first 3 years, I moved to 3 different cities. And it wasn't always easy to pull up roots and start over. But again, you've pushed through your limits. And I encourage people to have a little petri dish, those things that are sort of untested,
Yeah.
where you can go out there and I can't sing. I was actually asked to leave the choir because I just can't sing. So it's in my petri dish, but so I can fail, but I can fail in a safe spot. And what that does is get you comfortable with understanding how you respond when you do fail. Do you pout? Do you start to feel sorry for yourself? You start to get down on yourself. So, this is a safe place where you can try different things and you can learn how to fail smartly. And the next thing would be to control your thoughts. You become what you think. Now, we can't avoid negative or self-critical thoughts. but you can refuse to dwell on them. You can replace them with positive thoughts. And by changing the way you focus and the way you think about self-limiting beliefs and other obstacles, you can kind of rewire your brain so you can accomplish, more than you thought you could. And I would say the last thing would be just to learn to focus. If you want to be mentally tough, you must learn to focus your energy, both mental and physical. And again, we'll go back to the athletes you were talking about. They repeat the same 9 mind-numbing tasks over and over until it becomes second nature. And so to achieve exceptional focus, you've got to break down anything you're trying to learn into smaller parts. You've got to spend extra time on the actions you find especially difficult. You've got to put your ego on the back burner and ask for critical feedback, and then keep your goals in front of you and review them over and over again.
Well, there's also another interesting side of your personality, because you're a former FBI agent, you deal with mental toughness, but you also took theology. Would you like to tell us something about this and maybe how it combines with all the rest of your background? Up to you.
Oh, thank you for that question. My spirituality has always been important. When you're working at a busy job, you don't always have the opportunity to spend as much time doing those things that you think will enliven you and keep you spiritually on point. So when I retired, I actually had for the first time in my life to do that. So I went to seminary, and I didn't ever want to become ordained, but what I did want to do was dig deeper into what makes people tick. And that curiosity started in the FBI Academy, or excuse me, when I was at that undercover in service, because I had to be curious about myself. If I'm curious about myself, I'm more curious about other people as well. So I've always understood that there was something bigger and better and bolder than me out there. And I wanted to awaken that in myself. And I know there's a lot of theology out there where you ask faith to come into your heart. I'm of the opinion and experience that it's always here. We just have to awaken it. And so that's what my years in the seminary did for me.
Well, that's great and very interesting, and also probably unexpected to a lot of people listening to this video. What is the ultimate advice you would give to someone who's striving with their own mental toughness?
Truthfully, the first place to start is with yourself. It means taking a long, hard, loving look at who you are, at what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And please don't downplay the weaknesses. We all have them. But a lot of people try to, and I hear this advice all the time, it's identify your strengths and your weaknesses and then focus on making your weaknesses stronger. And actually, I would say that's not good advice. Instead, identify your strengths and grow them and manage your weaknesses, because they're never going to be the thing you're going to tie your star to. We all have different talents and skills. They're God-given. We're born with them. And because of that, it's giving honor to the Creator who created us to be exactly who we are, because we are who we are, and we're in the spot we should be. We're placed where we are going to be most productive. As they say, grow where you're planted. And so, again, I'm going to keep coming back to self-awareness and understanding yourself well enough that you can identify those areas you really do need to excel in. And we all have them.
Well, I think that we covered this topic in a very complete way, thanks to your knowledge. So thanks for your time again and for the very precious explanations that you gave us today.
Thank you, Leo. I appreciate that. It was wonderful being on your show.
Also, I look forward to inviting you again to talk about terrorism or true crime next time.
Absolutely.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.